Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Phil at the Movies. I'm your host, Phil Walsh, and this is episode number 115 of this ongoing podcast series that is always for the love of movies. Now, whether you are listening to this episode on your favorite podcasting app or watching on YouTube, once again, friends and listeners and watchers of the show, welcome back to another episode. And we are now in the midst of the summer movie going season. And particularly when you think of summer movies, and certainly when I think of summer movies, a film like Jaws comes to mind. There is something about a shark film, particularly that one, that sort of conjures up all of the imagination and wonder of this time of year. And that is the topic of today's show. I'm going to be reviewing the film Under Paris. This is now the new Netflix film. It is a shark movie. Again, not trying to reinvent the wheel necessarily, but I must say, this is one of the better shark films that I have seen in recent years. It certainly takes a bite out of the competition. It is no Jaws, let me begin by saying that, but as far as a summer fun popcorn type movie, yeah, this one definitely keeps treading water and delivers some fun at the beach, if you will. All right, I'll try to keep the water and beach metaphors and puns to a minimum for today's show. But before I begin, as always, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have not done so already, I would encourage you to rate and review this podcast on any of the number of podcasting apps, including Apple. And if you are watching this on YouTube, again, give a like and subscribe. And of course, share this with your family, your friends, anybody who you think might enjoy listening to a fellow movie buff go on and on, perhaps too long at certain points, over a love of movies. And that is where we begin today with the new Netflix film Under Paris. Now, I must say, I am a little skeptical whenever a shark movie is announced. It's been one of those situations where I have been bitten, if you will, a few times in the past and have been severely and sadly disappointed by a number of shark films in recent years. Jaws really cornered the market of this subgenre. And yes, there have been some entertaining and frankly gripping shark films over the years, to say nothing of the Jaws sequel specifically. I'm looking at you, Jaws 2. But a film like Deep Blue Sea is certainly entertaining as a over-the-top, eccentric shark film. There is another one from, I think, about 2009 or 2010 called The Reef, which is relatively gripping, but none of these films can swim in the same waters, if you will, as Jaws. So when I saw the announcement and trailer and later poster for this film, Under Paris, I was a little skeptical. Now, the plot of this movie is rather straightforward. Sharks in the Seine. That's pretty much all you have to take away from it. It's in Paris. You've got a team of, I guess you would say, traditional sort of stock characters, if you will, that you find in any number of these related movies. You've got the marine biologist character. You've got the sort of concerned police chief. You've got the disinterested mayor archetype. I mean, again, Jaws really set the standard for how these movies are portrayed and what the formula is, and it did it again. Was the first. It did it remarkably well. But this movie, I have to say, it really does lean into sort of the. I don't want to call it camp, but there is a lot of fun to this film because it starts off, I'll say it, it's you tread water for the first probably, 45 minutes of the film. It's a slow burn in a way, and I kept saying, okay, yeah, there's sort of a serious tone with this movie because they're trying to track down whether or not there is a Mako shark in the Seine, and this is ahead of a triathlon that is going to be occurring in Paris before the Olympic Games. And so there's sort of this race against the clock to see if in fact there is a shark in the famous river. Now, of course, there was a little bit of a backstory with one of the characters. She and her team came face to face with this Mako shark years ago during a tagging exercise, and all of her team were massacred by this shark. She was the only survivor, so she kind of has that survivor's guilt and a traumatic hangover from what happened at sea a number of years earlier. And there's a little commentary and subtext in this film about the effects of climate change and how that is impacting the way sharks are uh, sort of breeding and habitating and adjusting to changes in water temperature and locations. But that's really more to the side because the real uh, point of this film is the idea of a shark, or in this case, sharks in the Seine. And where the movie really gets going, there is an effort to try and relocate the shark once they discover that it's in the Seine and hiding out in the catacombs. And there's sort of this environmental group that is trying to guide the shark out and get it back into open waters. Well, as you can imagine, I won't go into too details to savor the experience. Everything goes to hell in a handbasket. They sink, if you will, metaphorically speaking, and it is a carnage fest. Well, the movie does a couple interesting things. It sort of leans into the usual theatrics of a shark film. You've got the blood, you've got the guts, you've got the shark causing mayhem, and then it sort of slows down a little bit. It goes back to that race against the clock mentality where they're trying to figure out what to do with the shark and then coming up against the resistant mayor and political figures who don't believe there's a shark or think that it can be controlled or handled by proper authorities. And so where things really kick off. And I think what sold this film for me is the third act because it really does live up to the name of the film, Under Paris. And I will not go into great detail because this is one of those experiences where again, I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel here. Again, this is not Jaws 2.0. I want to get that out there. But as far as shark movies go, and I think back to recent years, there's been films like The Meg 2, there was that film in the shark, the trenches or whatnot a few years ago, or they were in a cage. I'm honestly forgetting the name. That kind of shows you how memorable the film was for me. There was The Shallows from a few years back with Blake Lively, which was entertaining and certainly had a hook to it. But again, there's not a lot of these films that sort of rise to the surface in a way. I mean, sort of Sharknado films have kind of dominated the perception of them, and so everybody kind of thinks they're just sort of laughably bad or just sort of camp fun for a lack of a better phrase. And again, this film does lean into sort of the outrageous fun at parts, but it's sincere in its execution. And when we get to the third act, holy mackerel, does this film kick it up? I mean, it, put aside the blood and the carnage that you usually find in these kind of films. It's just the whole execution of a shark, or in this case, sharks in in the Seine. It goes exactly as you might imagine, and it's wild. It's fun. Again, it plays like a big budget popcorn movie, even though this is a Netflix film, and I know that can sometimes have a negative connotation with it. This felt like something you would honestly see and watch and enjoy on the big screen. I really was sold on this movie by the third act, and I think because it is so out there, it's so outrageous, and they commit to it. Because I was kind of thinking to myself, all right, how are they going to thread this needle? Are they going to go more of the traditional route of sort of people versus a shark, and it's people one, shark zero kind of a situation, or is it going to be more of a social commentary or an ecological commentary? Because there are sort of hints of that at the beginning of the film, and it's frankly neither of those options. It goes into just what you go for with these kind of films, which is not to be lectured to. It's not to sort of come away with some big philosophical understanding about our place in the sea and sharks and sort of coexisting. It's just wild fun. It's Sharknado, but done right, if I could say that. I know there are fans of those films. I'm personally not. I think they're just too outrageous. This threads that balance between being overtly camp and finding the happy middle. I had a blast with it. It's summer entertainment. It's a great popcorn film. It's a fun movie to watch with family and friends. And if you are a fan of any kind of shark film, I think this is one you can really sink your teeth into. Again, pardon the expressions and puns, but again, I walked away with this film saying, yeah, treads water at the very beginning, takes a little bit of time getting to where it's going, but once you get to the third act, it really does bring it all home and makes the experience all the more worthwhile. And the way they have set this film up, I could see them going in a sequel and sort of executing in a more sophisticated and effective way than the Sharknado films have when it comes to dealing with sharks on land, shall we say. There's a lot of possibilities for this, you know, potential sequel. I have no idea if they're going to do a sequel, but they certainly leave the door open, and that's again as far as I will go in terms of divulging any spoilers, because this is one of those films where if I tell you what happens, it'll kind of ruin the shock and awe factor, and I think you really want to sink your teeth into this and enjoy it, particularly if you are a fan of these kind of films. So I recommend Under Paris. It is one of the better shark films I have seen in recent years. And again, it's by no means rising to the same level as Jaws. That's in a class all by itself. Jaws is the first. It is the one that did it the best. And frankly, every other shark film suffers by comparison when you put it next to Jaws. But when you sort of find these films that sort of decide to do their own thing and pay homage to Jaws. I mean, there's certainly nods to films like Deep Blue Sea in here, Jaws 2, Jaws 3, and of course the OG itself, but it never feels like it's a copy and paste effort. This film has its own rhythm and story beats that make it entertaining and exciting. And ultimately, like I said, it's once you get to that third act, it just goes out. They blow the water up, so to speak, and it's perfect summer entertainment. So I recommend this film. Definitely check it out if you are a fan of shark movies, and even if you're just looking for sort of a fun, easy movie to watch on a Friday night on Netflix, definitely check this one out. I think you will be entertained and walk away with a good piece of shark entertainment, if you will, which is not always the case. I will just say though, and this is a small critique, and this is a critique that I have about all shark movies, frankly, post Jaws, with like a slight exception with Deep Blue Sea. But even then, with all of the advancements in digital technology, and yes, this is going to be me on a soapbox for a minute, so bear with me. But with all of the advancements in digital technology, and even with just sort of animatronics and movie magic, the shark in Jaws, and I'm talking about the original film, still holds up almost 50 years later. And I recently saw the film on the big screen back in May, and I have to say it still works. I think part of it is just the way that film was put together, the lack of sort of showcasing the shark because of the malfunctions with the mechanical operation. They sort of had to work with less. But at the same time, when you do see that shark, even though you do know it is a fake shark, you buy it. I certainly buy into it much more than even the more sort of realistic and aesthetically, realistic sharks that you see in films like The Shallows or in Under Paris. There's just something about the shark in Jaws that was nicknamed Bruce on the set, named after Steven Spielberg's lawyer. So there's a little factoid you can share with friends and family at summer parties this year. But there's just something about that shark, the way it looks, the way it was used in that film. It is so much more realistic and effective than what we see in these kind of movies today. And I think that ultimately, again, it's just a testament to the staying power of Jaws, that it just still holds up after all these years. And none of the other sharks in the other three films hold a candle to that original one. They all look fake by comparison, but there's just something about that. And I'm not the only person that has said that. There are countless documentaries and sort of movie aficionados who will say the same exact thing, that there is something realistic and unsettling about that first shark in the 1975 film that just it works, it holds up, and I mean, there's a reason why Jaws is the gold standard. Yes, it came first, but it just pioneered so much and I mean created the modern day summer blockbuster that we are still reveling in and enjoying to this day. But all right, I'll get off my soapbox. I don't want to turn this into an entire diatribe about fake sharks in these kind of movies. But to tie it all together, to end this swim, if you will, go see or go watch Under Paris. I think you will have a great time with. Again, doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it is a passable and enjoyable shark film, and just an all in all good summer fun movie. So that does it for me today. I want to thank you as always for tuning in and hearing what I have to say on movies. Again, whether you are listening or watching on YouTube, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continued support of this show, and most important of all, your friendship. All right, everybody, I'll be back next week, and we will do this all over again for the love of movies.